I still remember the scent of burning pine in the air that night, the night they came for me. The ancient ceremonial fires cast long, dancing shadows across the stone walls of our village's central gathering place, where everyone who mattered stood watching, everyone except me. I had been hidden away in my family's modest dwelling at the edge of the settlement, wrapped in layers of soft linen that smelled of lavender and fear. My mother's fear, sharp and acrid beneath her gentle floral perfume. "Stay here, Elise," she had whispered, her fingers trembling as she tucked a strand of my pale blonde hair behind my ear. "Whatever you hear, whatever you feel, don't come out." Then she pressed something cold and metallic into my palm, my grandmother's silver pendant, a crescent moon embracing a tiny star. "Remember what she always told you, even in darkness, you carry light." I clutched the pendant tightly, feeling its edges dig into my skin. Grandmother had been the only one who never looked at me with that mixture of pity and unease that had become so familiar. She alone spoke of my Omega nature as a gift rather than a burden. "The rarest treasures," she would say, "are the ones most misunderstood." But she was gone now, and with her, any shield I might have had against what was coming. The distant drums grew louder, their rhythm mimicking the frantic beating of my heart. The choosing ceremony had begun. Every 7 years, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories would send his envoys to select potential brides from among the Omega females of the 5 allied packs. An honor, they called it. A duty. A privilege. A sentence. I pressed my back against the cool earthen wall of our home storage cellar, drawing my knees to my chest. Perhaps they would overlook me. Perhaps they would choose Marielle from the River Clan, with her confident smile and graceful movements. Or Sophia from the Eastern Ridge, whose Omega scent was said to calm even the most agitated Alpha. Anyone but me, the awkward, too-tall Omega with hands that shook when people stared too long, and a voice that sometimes disappeared entirely when addressed by those in power. The drums stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence that pressed against my eardrums like water. Then came the howls, ceremonial calls signifying the selection had been made. My muscles relaxed slightly. It was done. Someone else had been chosen. Then I heard my mother's wail. It cut through the night like a blade. A sound of such raw anguish that it physically hurt to hear it. Before I could process what it meant, heavy footsteps approached our dwelling. The cellar door flew open, and torchlight flooded my hiding place. 3 royal guards stood above me, their massive frames blocking any chance of escape. "Elise of the Shadow Valley Pack," the center guard announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "You have been chosen as potential bride to King Edmund of the Northern Territories. You will come with us now." My mouth opened, but no sound emerged. This couldn't be happening. I was nothing special, not beautiful enough, not graceful enough, not strong enough to be queen to the most powerful Alpha in 5 territories. It had to be a mistake. "Please," I finally managed to whisper. "There must be some confusion. I'm not—" "There is no confusion," the guard cut in. "You have been scented and selected." The king's emissary was most specific. Scented? I hadn't even attended the ceremony. How could they have— My mother appeared behind the guards, her face streaked with tears, eyes wild with desperate fear. "She's too young," she pleaded, though we all knew I had passed my 19th winter. Well past the age of eligibility. "She's not prepared for court life. Please, choose another." The guard's expression softened slightly, the first hint of humanity I'd seen in him. "It was not our choice to make, madam. The selection is final." I was given 10 minutes to gather my belongings. 10 minutes to say goodbye to the only home I'd ever known, to the mother who had protected me from the world's cruelties as best she could. 10 minutes to leave behind everything familiar before being escorted to a carriage that would take me to meet a king known throughout the territories as ruthless in battle and merciless to his enemies, King Edmund, the Lycan king of the north, the Alpha whose howl alone was said to make rival packs surrender, the ruler whose name mothers used to frighten disobedient pups into behaving, and I was to be presented to him as a potential bride. The journey north took 7 days. 7 days of watching forests grow darker and mountains grow taller through the small window of the royal carriage. 7 days of barely eating, barely sleeping, as terror and confusion battled within me. I clutched my grandmother's pendant throughout, running my thumb over its worn surface like a prayer. On the 6th night, as we made camp in a clearing surrounded by ancient pines, the female attendant who had been assigned to me, a beta named Clara with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, finally addressed what neither of us had spoken about. "You know," she said quietly, poking at the small fire between us, "being chosen isn't the death sentence you seem to think it is." I looked up at her, surprised by her directness. "What would you call being taken from your home to be presented to a stranger who may or may not decide to bind you to him for life?" Clara's lips quirked slightly. "An opportunity, perhaps. For what?" "For power. For a life beyond the boundaries of a small village pack. For change." I shook my head. I never wanted power or change. And yet, here you are. Clara leaned forward. "Let me tell you something about our king that you won't hear in the frightened whispers of outlying packs. Yes, he is fierce. Yes, he can be ruthless when necessary. But he is also fair. He protects what is his with a dedication that borders on obsession. And," she hesitated, "he is lonely." Lonely? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. The most powerful alpha in 5 territories? Power doesn't warm your bed at night, or ease the burden of difficult decisions. Clara's eyes reflected the dancing flames between us. For 3 choosing ceremonies, he has selected potential brides. And 3 times he has sent them all home. "Why?" I asked, curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. She shrugged. "He says none of them felt right. But the council grows impatient. The kingdom needs an heir, and for that, the king needs a queen." Her gaze settled on me with uncomfortable intensity. "Something about your scent made his emissary certain you might be different." I swallowed hard. "And if I'm not? If I don't feel right to him? Then you return home with generous compensation and a story to tell your grandchildren someday." Clara stood, brushing dirt from her traveling clothes. "But I've served in the royal household for 15 years, and I've never seen the emissary so certain." Sleep eluded me that night, my mind spinning with Clara's words and the looming reality of what awaited me. By the time we reached the king's fortress the following afternoon, I was exhausted, disoriented, and completely unprepared for the grandeur that rose before me. The northern palace was not built of stone and wood like our village structures, but carved directly into the face of the tallest mountain in the range. Massive windows of colored glass caught the afternoon sunlight, sending prisms of blue, green, and purple dancing across the courtyard as our carriage pulled to a stop. Guards in silver-gray uniforms lined the entrance stairs, standing so still they might have been carved from the same mountain. Clara helped me from the carriage, steadying me when my legs threatened to buckle beneath me. "Breathe," she murmured. "Just breathe." I was whisked inside and taken directly to what would be my chambers, a suite of rooms larger than my entire family home, decorated in shades of cream and soft blue. Attendants appeared as if from nowhere, filling a copper tub with steaming water scented with oils I couldn't identify. They washed me, dried me, dressed me in a gown of midnight blue that flowed like water when I moved. "The king will see you this evening," Clara informed me, as a young beta woman arranged my pale blonde hair in an elaborate style with small silver pins. "Just the 2 of you. It's unconventional for a first meeting, but he was most insistent." Terror seized me again. "Tonight? But I'm not prepared. I don't know how to address him or what to say, or—" "Just be honest," Clara said, her usually practical tone softening. "That's all he asks. Now look at yourself." She turned me toward a full-length mirror, and for a moment I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. The gown's deep color made my pale skin look luminescent rather than sickly, and whatever the attendants had done to my face had brought a warmth to my features I'd never noticed before. I looked not beautiful, perhaps, but striking in a way that was unfamiliar. "Remember," Clara said, adjusting a final pin in my hair, "you were chosen. Whatever you think of yourself, something about you called to him. Hold on to that." As twilight fell, I was escorted through winding corridors of the mountain palace, each turn revealing new wonders, tapestries depicting ancient battles, fountains that seemed to flow from the very rock itself, gardens of strange mushrooms and moss that glowed with faint bioluminescence. Under different circumstances, I might have been enchanted. Finally, we reached a set of heavy wooden doors carved with the phases of the moon. The guard knocked once, and a deep voice from within commanded, "Enter." Clara squeezed my hand once, then nudged me forward as the doors swung open. The king's private study was not what I had expected. Rather than the ostentatious display of wealth I had anticipated, the room was almost austere. Practical furniture of dark wood, walls lined with books, and a massive fireplace that cast the only light in the space. And standing with his back to me, silhouetted against that fireplace, was King Edmund himself. Even from behind he was intimidating. Tall and broad-shouldered, his posture that of a man accustomed to command. His hair was darker than the shadows that danced around him, falling just past his shoulders in a way that seemed more warrior than royal. "Your Majesty," the guard announced. "Lady Elise of the Shadow Valley Pack." The doors closed behind me with a finality that made my heart stutter. I was alone with him now. Remembering court protocol I'd been hastily taught, I lowered myself into a deep curtsy, keeping my eyes downcast. "Rise," he said, his voice deeper than I had imagined, resonating in my chest like distant thunder. I stood but kept my gaze on the intricate pattern of the carpet beneath my feet. "Look at me." It was not a request, but a command. One that made every instinct in my Omega nature respond before my mind could catch up. My head lifted, and our eyes met for the first time. The Lycan king was not what stories had led me to expect. Yes, he was fearsome in his intensity, sharp features, strong jaw darkened with the shadow of a beard, and eyes that seemed to shift between gray and silver in the firelight. But he wasn't the monster of childhood nightmares. He was younger than I had thought, perhaps 30 at most, and there was something in his expression beyond the hardness of authority. A wariness, a question. For several heartbeats he said nothing, simply studied me with an intensity that made me want to shrink into myself, to hide, to run. Then he inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly. "Your scent," he said finally. "It's different here than it was in the sample. Stronger, more complex." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I remained silent, fighting the trembling that threatened to overtake me. He moved then, circling me slowly like a predator assessing prey. Though he kept his distance, I could feel his gaze on me, assessing, calculating, seeing too much. "Are you afraid of me, Elise of Shadow Valley?" he asked, stopping directly before me again. The truth spilled from me before I could consider a more diplomatic response. "Yes." To my surprise, his lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something that softened his severe features. "Good. Fear keeps you alert." He gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit, please." I perched on the edge of the seat, back straight, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. He poured 2 glasses of wine from a decanter on a nearby table, handed one to me, then took the chair opposite mine. The firelight caught in his eyes, making them glow like a wolf's in darkness. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked after taking a sip from his glass. "I've been chosen as a potential bride," I said softly, the words still surreal on my tongue. "And what do you think of that honor?" Again, truth compelled me. "I think it's terrifying." That almost smile appeared again, not the answer most would give. "What answer would you prefer?" "I prefer honesty to flattery." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Elise, what terrifies you most? That you might be chosen as my queen? Or that you might not be?" The question caught me off guard. I had never considered the latter possibility as something to fear. I don't know you," I said finally. "How can I want or fear a life bound to someone I've just met?" He nodded slowly, as if I had passed some test. "A fair point. Then let us remedy that." He raised his glass slightly. "Ask me anything you wish. Tonight we begin to know each other." And so began the strangest conversation of my life, there in the firelit study of the most powerful alpha in 5 territories. As the night deepened around us, something shifted imperceptibly between us. Not comfort, exactly, but a thinning of the tension that had coiled in my chest since the moment I was chosen. until he asked about my childhood, and I felt myself withdraw, the walls around those memories rising instinctively. "You're hiding," he observed, his voice dropping to a lower register. Something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. Not entirely unpleasant, but disconcerting. "Don't hide from me," the Lycan king growled softly, his eyes gleaming with an emotion I couldn't name. "Not if we are to have any chance at all." His words hung in the air between us, a command and a plea entwined. The fire crackled in the hearth, sending shadows dancing across his face, shadows that softened the hard angles of his jaw, the sharp intensity of his gaze. For a moment, I glimpsed something vulnerable in those silver-gray eyes, something that called to a part of me I'd spent years burying, my childhood. I began hesitantly, my fingers tracing the rim of my wineglass. It wasn't what most would expect. King Edmund leaned back in his chair, creating space between us as if sensing my discomfort. "Because you're an Omega?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "In Shadow Valley, Omegas are rare. Treasured in theory, but in practice—" I paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound like self-pity. "In practice, we're sheltered to the point of suffocation. Protected," he offered. "Hidden," I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. "There's a difference." Something flickered in his expression. Approval, perhaps. "Tell me." The wine had loosened my tongue, or perhaps it was simply the strange intimacy of the firelit room and his unwavering attention. Either way, words I'd never spoken aloud began to spill from me. From the time my nature presented at 13, I became something to be guarded rather than guided. While other young wolves were learning to hunt, to track, to defend themselves, I was kept within village boundaries. While they strengthened their bonds with the pack through moon runs and seasonal rituals, I was sequestered away for my safety. The bitterness I'd spent years swallowing rose in my voice. They meant well, my family, our pack leaders. But their protection became its own kind of cage. "And what did you want instead?" he asked quietly. The question startled me. No one had ever asked what I wanted. "To belong," I whispered, the truth of it aching in my chest. "To contribute. To be seen as more than just a fragile thing to be preserved until—" I stopped abruptly, heat rising to my face. "Until you were claimed by an alpha," he finished for me, no judgment in his tone. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "And now you've been claimed by the most dominant alpha in 5 territories." His voice had shifted again, carrying that rumbling undertone that seemed to resonate in my bones. "Is that why you tremble when I look at you? Because you fear trading one cage for another?" My head snapped up at that, surprised by his perception. "Wouldn't you? In my position?" The king stood suddenly, moving to the window that overlooked the moonlit mountains. His silhouette was powerful against the night sky, shoulders broad beneath his simple black tunic, tension evident in his stance. "I was 15 when I became king," he said after a long moment. "My father and older brother killed in the same border skirmish, too young, too unprepared, too angry." He glanced over his shoulder at me. "I know something of cages that others cannot see. Elise of Shadow Valley." Something shifted in the air between us. A recognition, perhaps. 2 souls shaped by circumstances beyond their control. "Why did you choose me?" I asked. The question that had haunted me since the guards had pulled me from my hiding place. "There were others far more suitable, Omegas trained for court life, from more prominent packs." He turned fully to face me. I didn't. Confusion must have shown on my face because he continued. "I sent my most trusted advisor, Gabriel, to conduct the selection. He has a gift for sensing compatible energies. The choice was his." "But you're the king," I said, struggling to understand. "Surely the final decision is yours. And yet I've rejected every potential bride presented to me for 7 years." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, much to the council's increasing frustration. "Why?" He moved closer, stopping a few paces from my chair. The firelight cast his features in gold and shadow, making him look otherworldly. "Because I've seen what happens when wolves mate without the true bond. My parents were such a pair, a political alliance, nothing more. My father took his pleasures elsewhere. My mother retreated into bitter isolation. The kingdom suffered for it, his eyes locked with mine, intensity radiating from him like heat. I will not repeat their mistake. And you think I might bond with you? The concept seemed impossible. True bonds were rare enough between wolves of the same pack, who grew up together, shared history and experiences. How could such a connection form between strangers? I think Gabriel has never been wrong. His voice dropped to that soft growl that sent shivers down my spine. And I think your scent calls to something in me that I've spent years denying. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. This was moving too quickly, the world tilting beneath my feet. I stood abruptly, needing distance, air, perspective. I should retire, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's late. For a moment, I thought he might object, might command me to stay. Instead, he nodded once, then pulled a silver bell cord near the fireplace. Almost immediately, Clara appeared at the door. "Show Lady Elise to her chambers," the king instructed, his tone neutral once more, the moment of vulnerability gone as if it had never existed. But as I moved to follow Clara, he spoke again, his voice carrying that rumbling timbre that seemed to reach places inside me I hadn't known existed. "Rest well, Elise of Shadow Valley. Tomorrow we begin to know each other in daylight." I slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with silver eyes and shadow wolves and mountains that whispered secrets I couldn't quite hear. When morning came, Clara arrived with breakfast and news that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "The king wishes to show you the territory today," she announced, laying out a riding outfit of soft leather and shades of forest green. "You do ride, don't you?" I nodded, though ride was perhaps too generous a term. I had occasionally been allowed on the gentlest mare in our village, for short excursions never far from home. The Northern Palace stables, I soon discovered, housed no gentle mares. The horse presented to me was a dappled gray stallion, with intelligent eyes and a restless energy that made me hesitate at the mounting block. "His name is Whisper," came the king's voice from behind me. I turned to find him already mounted on a massive black horse that made mine look small by comparison. "He's spirited but not cruel. He won't let you fall." I wondered if there was meaning in his choice of mount for me. A test, perhaps, or a message. Either way, I refused to fail before we'd even begun. Gathering my courage, I mounted the stallion, my hands shaking only slightly as I took the reins. King Edmund nodded his approval, then urged his horse forward. The castle gates opened before us, and within moments we were climbing a winding mountain path, the morning sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. The day that followed changed something fundamental between us. Away from the formality of the palace, the king became not relaxed exactly. I sensed he was never truly that, but more himself. He spoke of the territory with a pride that went beyond mere possession, pointing out landmarks and sharing the legends attached to them. He knew the names of every guard we passed, every woodcutter, every child who stared wide-eyed as we rode by. "You love this place," I observed, as we paused atop a ridge overlooking a vast valley, where a river wound like a silver ribbon through forests and meadows. "It's mine to protect," he answered simply, though his expression suggested the relationship went deeper than duty. "Is that how you see everything, in terms of possession and protection?" His eyes met mine, and there was that hint of approval again at my directness. Not everything, but much. He dismounted in a fluid motion, then approached my horse. "May I?" I nodded, unsure what he was asking permission for until his hands encircled my waist, lifting me easily from the saddle. He set me on my feet, but didn't immediately step back, his hands lingering at my waist, his scent, pine and smoke, and something uniquely him, enveloping me. "And how do you see the world, Elise of Shadow Valley?" he asked, his voice low. I fought the urge to look away from the intensity of his gaze. "In terms of connections," I answered honestly, "the threads that bind one life to another." "And what threads bind you?" "Duty to my family, loyalty to my pack." I hesitated, then added, "Fear of failing either, and to me?" His thumbs traced small circles at my waist, the contact sending warmth spiraling through me despite the layers of clothing between us. "What binds you here?" "I don't know yet," I whispered. Something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. An honest answer. He released me then, stepping back to give me space. Come. There's something I want to show you. We left the horses ground-tied and continued on foot, following a narrow path that wound through a stand of ancient pines. The forest grew denser, the air cooler beneath the canopy, until suddenly we emerged into a small clearing dominated by a pool of startlingly blue water. Steam rose from its surface, swirling in the cool mountain air. A hot spring, the king explained, though I had already guessed as much. One of many scattered throughout these mountains. It's beautiful, I said, drawn to the water's edge by an impulse I couldn't name. It's said that the first wolves found their way here during the Great Winter, when all other lands were buried in snow. These waters saved them, and in gratitude they swore to protect the mountains forever after. He crouched beside me, dipping his fingers into the steaming water. Every king since has renewed that oath upon taking the throne. I watched the ripples spread from his hand, mesmerized by the way the sunlight caught in the tiny waves. You believe the old stories? I believe in honoring the past while forging a new future. He looked up at me, and in the dappled light filtering through the trees, his eyes seemed to shift color again, from silver to storm cloud gray. That's what I hope for this kingdom. A balance of tradition and progress. Is that why you seek a queen, for balance? His expression hardened slightly. I seek a queen because the kingdom needs an heir. The council reminds me of this with increasing frequency. And what do you need? I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied my face as if searching for something hidden there. Then, I need someone who doesn't fear the wolf beneath the crown, someone who sees me, not just the king. The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. This was not the ruthless Lycan king of legend, but a man carrying the weight of an entire kingdom alone. Before I could respond, a distant howl broke the silence, a signal from the palace guards. King Edmund stood immediately, tension returning to his frame. We're needed back, he said, his voice once again the neutral tone of authority. The ride back to the palace was swift and mostly silent. As we approached the gates, I could sense something had changed. Guards moved with heightened alertness, and an atmosphere of tension hung in the air. In the courtyard, a man waited for us, tall and lean, with hair the color of burnished copper and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at you. He bowed as we dismounted. Gabriel, the king acknowledged, and I realized this must be the advisor who had selected me at the choosing ceremony. What's happened? Delegates from the Southern Coalition have arrived unexpectedly, Gabriel replied, his gaze flicking briefly to me before returning to the king. Lord Raven leads them. Something dark passed across King Edmund's face. What does he want? To discuss matters of mutual concern regarding territorial boundaries, Gabriel quoted, his tone suggesting he didn't believe this stated purpose. And, he hesitated, to present his daughter as a potential queen consort. The king's expression hardened into something cold and forbidding, the face from the frightening stories I'd grown up hearing. Take Lady Elise to her chambers, he instructed Clara, who had appeared silently at my side. Ensure she has everything she needs. I was being dismissed, shut away again while important matters were discussed. The familiar feeling of being excluded, protected, hidden rose within me like a bitter tide. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. Is that necessary? Both men looked at me with surprise. Gabriel's tinged with interest, the king's with something I couldn't quite identify. What I mean, I continued, gathering courage from some unknown reservoir, is that if I am to be considered as your queen, shouldn't I begin to understand the political landscape I would be entering? A tense silence followed my words. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the king's response. I felt Clara stiffen beside me, clearly expecting a rebuke for my presumption. Instead, King Edmund's expression shifted slightly, the hardness in his jaw easing, something like curiosity flickering in his eyes. A valid point, he conceded, surprising everyone present. His gaze moved to Gabriel. Arrange for Lady Elise to join us after the formal greetings. Have her seated to my left, 2 places removed. Gabriel nodded, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. As you wish, Your Majesty. Clara led me quickly to my chambers, where a flurry of activity ensued. My riding clothes were exchanged for a formal gown of deep emerald that complemented my pale coloring. My hair was arranged in an elegant style that conveyed dignity without ostentation. Throughout it all, Clara offered hurried whispers of advice. Lord Raven is the most powerful alpha in the Southern Coalition, she explained as she fastened a silver necklace around my throat. He has sought alliance with our king for years, primarily through his daughter Serena. Is she an Omega? I asked, trying to ignore the knot of unease forming in my stomach. No, a Beta, but from a bloodline almost as ancient as the royal one. Clara's hands stilled momentarily. She is formidable, beautiful, I found myself asking, then immediately regretted the insecurity in the question. Clara met my eyes in the mirror in the way a sword is beautiful, she replied carefully. Striking, sharp, and dangerous to touch. My heart sank further. What chance did I, awkward, untrained in court politics, with none of the right connections, have against someone like that? Clara seemed to read my thoughts. Remember, she said firmly, you were chosen. The king has dismissed Serena 3 times already. There is something in you that calls to him. Before I could respond, a soft knock at the door announced Gabriel's arrival to escort me to the Great Hall. You've caused quite a stir, he remarked as we walked the stone corridors, his long strides forcing me to quicken my pace. It's not often someone surprises our king. I glanced up at him, trying to read his inscrutable expression. Was I wrong to speak up? Wrong? No, a smile ghosted across his features. Unexpected, certainly. The Omegas presented at previous choosing ceremonies were, he paused, choosing his words carefully, more conventional in their approach. You mean they didn't challenge the king's decisions? I translated. Gabriel's smile widened slightly. As I said, unexpected. We had reached the massive doors of the Great Hall, where 2 guards stood at attention. A word of advice, Lady Elise. Lord Raven is perceptive and ruthless. He will seek weaknesses to exploit. Reveal nothing. With that cryptic warning, he nodded to the guards, who swung the doors open. The sound of voices, laughter, and music washed over us. Gabriel placed my hand on his arm and led me into what felt like a battlefield disguised as a banquet. The Great Hall was a marvel of natural architecture, a vast cavern within the mountain, its ceiling soaring to impossible heights, where crystal formations caught and refracted light from hundreds of candles. Long tables stretched in parallel lines, filled with nobles and dignitaries in their finest attire. At the head of the room, on a raised dais, sat King Edmund on a throne of polished stone, his expression carefully neutral as he surveyed his guests. To his right sat a man who could only be Lord Raven, tall and lean like a hunting bird, with hair as black as his namesake and eyes that glittered like obsidian. Beside him was a woman approximately my age, whose beauty struck me like a physical blow. Her hair fell in waves of midnight over pale shoulders left bare by a crimson gown that clung to every perfect curve. This had to be Serena, the daughter Clara had warned me about. Gabriel led me through the crowd, which parted before us like water, whispers following in our wake. I kept my chin high, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel as curious eyes assessed me. The unknown Omega from an unremarkable pack, somehow chosen over daughters of more prestigious bloodlines. When we reached the high table, Gabriel announced me formally. King Edmund's eyes found mine, and something passed between us, a silent acknowledgement, perhaps, of the challenge ahead. He gestured to the empty seat 2 places to his left, exactly as he had specified. As I took my place, I became acutely aware of Lord Raven's scrutiny. His gaze crawled over me like something physical, assessing, calculating, dismissive. So this is the new selection, he said, his voice smooth as silk but cold as winter. From Shadow Valley, I understand. A rather provincial pack. Before I could respond, King Edmund spoke. Shadow Valley has been loyal to the Northern Throne for 10 generations, he said, his tone deceptively casual. Loyalty matters more to me than prestige, Lord Raven. A subtle rebuke, delivered with perfect diplomatic precision. I hid my surprise behind a sip of wine. Of course, Lord Raven conceded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, though surely bloodlines must factor into such an important decision. The strength of the next generation depends on it. Serena leaned forward slightly. My father means well, Your Majesty, she said, her voice melodic and practiced. We all wish only for the continued strength of the Northern Territories. Her gaze slid to me, sharp as a blade beneath her perfect smile. And some bloodlines are simply stronger than others. I felt the sting of her implication, that my lineage was inferior, my Omega nature a weakness rather than a strength. Old insecurities threatened to rise within me, the familiar urge to shrink away, to hide. Then I felt it, a subtle shift in energy beside me. Glancing at King Edmund, I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, a flash of something dangerous in his eyes. He was angry at the slight against me, I realized with surprise. The knowledge gave me courage. Strength manifests in many ways, Lady Serena, I said, my voice quiet but clear. The wolf who survives is not always the one with the sharpest claws, but often the one with the keenest awareness of the entire pack's needs. A moment of stunned silence followed my words. Then King Edmund raised his goblet slightly in my direction, a gesture so subtle that only those closest to us would notice. Well said, Lady Elise. The conversation moved on to other topics: border patrols, trade agreements, rumors of unrest in distant territories. But I felt a tension beneath the polite exchanges, currents of power and politics I was only beginning to understand. Throughout the meal, I was aware of the king's periodic glances in my direction, as if checking that I was managing the unfamiliar waters of court intrigue. When the formal dinner concluded and music began for dancing, I expected to be forgotten. A temporary curiosity now relegated to the background. Instead, King Edmund appeared beside my chair, extending his hand. Lady Elise, he said, his voice carrying that rumbling undertone that seemed reserved for me alone. Would you honor me with this dance? A collective hush fell over the nearest tables. The king rarely danced, I would later learn, and never with potential brides at their first formal appearance. By this simple act, he was making a statement that everyone present would interpret and discuss for days to come. I placed my hand in his, acutely aware of the warmth of his palm against mine, the strength in his fingers as they closed around my own. He led me to the center of the floor, where other dancers respectfully created space around us. Everyone is staring, I whispered, as he placed his hand at my waist, drawing me closer than court protocol strictly dictated. Let them, he replied, his eyes never leaving mine as he guided me into the first steps of the dance. You handled Raven and his daughter admirably. I spoke without thinking, I admitted. I shouldn't have been so direct. Your honesty is refreshing in a place where most words carry double meanings. His hand at my waist tightened slightly as he guided me through a turn. Though you should know that you've made an enemy in Serena. She's not accustomed to being challenged. She sees me as competition, I said, the realization hitting me fully for the first time. For you. For the throne. Is that so surprising? I looked up at him. At the face that had begun to fascinate rather than frighten me, the strong jaw, the eyes that shifted color with his mood, the mouth that rarely smiled but when it did, transformed his entire countenance. Yes, I said simply. I still don't understand why I'm here. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. You will, he murmured, his voice so low I felt rather than heard the words. Soon. The dance ended too quickly, and as custom dictated, I was claimed for the next by Gabriel, while the king partnered with an elderly noblewoman whose delight was evident in her flushed cheeks. You continue to surprise, Gabriel remarked, as he led me through the simpler steps of this dance. His gaze was analytical, but not unkind. It's been many years since I've seen Edmund look at anyone the way he watches you. And how is that? I asked, curiosity overcoming propriety, like a man seeing sunlight after a long winter. A smile touched his lips. It gives me hope that my choice was correct. Your choice, I echoed. The king said you have a gift for sensing compatible energies. What does that mean? Gabriel considered me for a moment. Some can sense physical compatibility. the basic attraction between wolves that might make strong offspring. A useful skill, but limited. His eyes, I noticed, were an unusual shade of amber, almost golden in the candlelight. I sensed deeper resonances, the harmonies or discords between souls that determine whether two people will strengthen or diminish each other over time. And you sensed such a harmony between the king and me? The concept seemed impossible. We are nothing alike. Perhaps that's precisely why you resonate, Gabriel suggested. What he lacks, you possess. What you need, he provides. The dance brought us near to where Lord Raven stood watching the proceedings with narrowed eyes. Gabriel lowered his voice. Be wary tonight. Raven did not come here merely to present his daughter again. He seeks information, leverage. Trust no one you don't already know. Before I could ask what he meant, the dance ended, and Gabriel returned me to the high table with a formal bow. For the remainder of the evening, I was hyper-aware of the political undercurrents flowing through the room, the way conversations paused when certain people approached, the calculated movements of nobles between social groups, the careful watching of reactions and responses. Most of all, I was aware of Serena's cold gaze following me, and Lord Raven's calculating one tracking the king's every interaction with me. By the time the celebration began to wind down, tension had knotted itself between my shoulder blades, and I longed for the quiet of my chambers. As if sensing my fatigue, Clara appeared at my side. The king suggests you might wish to retire, she murmured. He's arranged for a guard escort. Gratitude washed through me. I made my formal farewells, aware of the king watching me from across the room, his expression unreadable. As I left the great hall, I heard quick footsteps behind me and turned to find Serena, her crimson gown catching the light like spilled blood. A moment, Lady Elise, she said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes hard as stone. I wanted to speak with you privately. Clara tensed beside me, but a subtle shake of my head kept her from intervening. Of course, Lady Serena. I'll be direct, Serena said once we'd moved into an alcove away from curious ears. You don't belong here. Whatever trick or chance brought you to the king's attention, it won't last. Omegas like you aren't made for court life or for ruling. You're made for breeding and little else. The cruelty of her words struck like physical blows, but I kept my expression neutral, remembering Gabriel's warning to reveal nothing. Thank you for your concern, I said quietly. But I believe the king will make his own determinations about what I am or am not suited for. Her perfect features hardened. He will choose me in the end. He always has. This, she gestured dismissively at me, is merely a diversion, a curiosity. When he needs a true partner, a queen who will strengthen his rule rather than weaken it with omega emotionality and fragility, he will turn to me. Perhaps, I acknowledged, refusing to show how her words echoed my own deepest insecurities. The choice is his to make, a choice that could be simplified, she said, her voice dropping to a silken whisper. Leave now, return to your little village pack, and spare yourself the humiliation of public rejection. I would even ensure you're compensated generously for your discretion. She was trying to bribe me to withdraw. The realization was so unexpected that I almost laughed. Instead, I straightened my spine and met her gaze directly. I appreciate your generous offer, I said, infusing my voice with a calmness I didn't feel, but I will remain until the king himself dismisses me. Good night, Lady Serena. I turned to leave, but her hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. You've made an enemy today, she hissed, all pretense of civility gone. Remember that when everything falls apart around you. I could have pulled away, could have called for the guards, but something in me, perhaps the part that had always been told to hide, to avoid conflict, refused to show fear. Instead, I looked pointedly at her hand on my wrist, then back to her face. I believe you're overstepping, Lady Serena, I said softly. The king wouldn't approve of his guests threatening his chosen potential. Her eyes widened slightly at my boldness, and she released me as if burned. This isn't over, she warned. No, I agreed, turning away. I suspect it's only beginning. As Clara and the guards escorted me back to my chambers, my mind raced with the implications of the evening's events. I had entered a world far more complex and dangerous than I had imagined. A world where words were weapons and alliances shifted like shadows, and somehow, improbably, I had become a piece on this political chessboard. In my chambers, as Clara helped me prepare for bed, a servant arrived with a small parcel wrapped in silk. "From His Majesty," the servant said with a bow before departing. Within the silk lay a small carved wolf of silver, exquisitely detailed, with tiny gems for eyes that caught the candlelight. A note accompanied it, written in a strong, angular hand. "For courage shown. Rest well, little wolf. Tomorrow brings new challenges." I clutched the silver wolf in my palm as I fell asleep that night, its weight somehow comforting against my skin. And for the first time since being taken from my home, I dreamed not of escape, but of possibilities. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the mountain crystal that served as my chamber windows. I woke clutching the silver wolf, its edges pressed into my palm as if trying to imprint itself on my skin. A symbol or a message? Either way, it had anchored me through dreams filled with dancing shadows and whispered threats. Clara arrived with a breakfast tray and news that made my stomach tighten. "The council wishes to meet you," she announced, laying out a gown of deep blue that reminded me of mountain lakes. "It's unusual this early in a potential stay. But after last night what?" I asked, reaching for the steaming tea she'd brought. "The king danced with you first," Clara explained, her tone suggesting this was more significant than I'd realized, and Lord Raven's unexpected arrival has accelerated certain discussions. I understood the implication. The political wheels were turning faster than anticipated, and I was expected to keep pace despite my lack of preparation. What should I expect from this council? Clara's hands stilled as she arranged my hair. "Questions, judgment. They'll want to determine if you're suitable beyond the king's apparent preference." She met my eyes in the mirror. "Be honest but careful. These are wolves who've survived decades of court politics." No pressure then," I murmured, trying to mask my anxiety with humor. Her lips quirked slightly. "Just be the woman who stood up to Serena last night. That one they might respect." An hour later, I found myself in a circular chamber deep within the mountain palace. 7 chairs arranged in a semicircle faced a single stone seat, mine, clearly. The counselors filed in one by one, each nodding formally in my direction before taking their place. They were a formidable collection. 3 women and 4 men, all bearing the unmistakable air of authority that comes with age and power. At their center sat an elderly woman, whose silver hair was elaborately braided with threads of gold, her posture straight, despite the apparent weight of her years. "Lady Elise of Shadow Valley," she began, her voice surprisingly strong. "I am Elder Matilda, head of the King's Council. We've asked you here to better understand the woman our king has brought into our midst." I inclined my head respectfully. "I'm honored by your attention, Elder. Honor has little to do with it," said the man to her right, lean and severe, with eyes like chips of ice. "This is a matter of succession and stability. The kingdom cannot afford another failed selection." "Counselor Henrik," Matilda chided gently, "let us not begin with accusations." She returned her attention to me. "You must understand our concern, child. King Edmund has rejected 17 potential queens over 7 years. The kingdom grows restless, and our enemies grow bold in the absence of a clear succession." "I understand," I said quietly, though in truth the political implications of the king's choice had only begun to dawn on me. "Do you?" asked another counselor, a woman with keen eyes and a skeptical tilt to her head. "You come from a small border pack with no political connections, no formal education in court matters, no training in the duties of a queen. What do you bring to the northern throne that others have not?" The question struck at the heart of my own doubts. What did I have to offer that someone like Serena did not? Before I could formulate a diplomatic response, the silver wolf in my pocket seemed to warm against my thigh, reminding me of the king's note. "For courage shown." "Honesty," I answered finally, lifting my chin. "I bring honesty, and a perspective uncolored by years of court intrigues. I bring compassion born from understanding what it means to be overlooked and underestimated. I bring the ability to see beyond power to the needs that power should serve." I took a breath, steadying myself. I don't yet know if I'm suited to be queen. But I do know that a throne exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and I understand that need intimately." A silence followed my words, not the awkward silence of disapproval, but a considering one. Elder Matilda's eyes, I noticed, had softened slightly. "Pretty words," remarked Counselor Henrik after a moment. "But a queen needs more than ideals. She needs strength to stand beside the most powerful alpha in 5 territories." "With respect," I said, finding courage I hadn't known I possessed. "Strength takes many forms. Not all are visible at first glance." A ghost of a smile touched Matilda's lips. "Indeed." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, child, what do you know of our king?" The question seemed deceptively simple, yet I sensed layers beneath it. "I know he ascended the throne young after tragedy," I said carefully. "I know he values loyalty and honesty. I know he carries the weight of his position alone, by choice rather than necessity." "And what of the man beneath the crown?" pressed Matilda. "What have you learned of him?" I considered the private moments we'd shared. His unexpected vulnerability in the firelit study, his pride in his territory, his anger at the slight against me. "I think," I said slowly, "that he is someone who has learned to hide his true nature, because his position demands it. Someone who seeks connection, but fears its potential cost. Someone who values strength, but recognizes that true power lies in restraint." Another silence fell, this one charged with something I couldn't identify. The counselors exchanged glances, communicating in the subtle language of those who have worked together for decades. "One last question," Matilda said finally. "Why are you here, Elise of Shadow Valley? Not why were you chosen, but why have you stayed? You could have declined, as is your right. Why accept this unexpected fate?" The question caught me off guard with its perception. Why had I stayed? Fear of disappointing my family? Duty to my pack? Or something else entirely? Something that had begun the moment silver-gray eyes had met mine across a firelit room, because for the first time in my life, I answered truthfully. I'm not being hidden away. I'm being seen, truly seen, for what I am rather than what others fear I might become, and I find I want to discover what that might mean. Matilda studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, decisively. "Thank you for your candor, Lady Elise. You may go." I left the council chamber with my heart pounding, unsure whether I had passed or failed their assessment. Clara was waiting to escort me back to my chambers, but we'd barely turned the first corner when Gabriel appeared, his expression unusually urgent. "Lady Elise," he said with a perfunctory bow. "The king requests your presence, immediately." Clara frowned. "She's just come from council questioning." "Surely it can wait until—" "It cannot," Gabriel interrupted, already turning to lead the way. "Please, my lady. It's important." Something in his tone silenced any objections I might have raised. I followed him through corridors I hadn't yet explored, deeper into the mountain, until we reached a heavy wooden door guarded by 2 of the king's personal sentinel wolves. "He's inside," Gabriel said, his voice lowered. "Something happened during the night. He wouldn't share details, but—" He hesitated. "I have not seen him like this in many years." Apprehension washed over me. Like what? Struggling for control, Gabriel's amber eyes held mine. "Be careful, but don't show fear. The wolf is close to the surface today." With that cryptic warning, he nodded to the guards, who opened the door. I stepped into what appeared to be the king's private training arena, a vast space carved from the living rock, its floor covered in sand, various weapons hanging on the distant walls. King Edmund stood at its center, stripped to the waist, his body gleaming with sweat as he moved through combat forms with a blade that seemed to catch the light from everywhere at once. His movements were precise, controlled, yet carried an underlying violence that made my breath catch. This was not practice, but ritual. A way to channel energy that might otherwise prove dangerous. I remained silent by the door, mesmerized by the deadly grace of his movements, the play of muscles beneath skin marked with the scars of old battles. He knew I was there. I was certain of it. Yet he continued his lethal dance, each arc of the blade cutting through the air with perfect precision. Finally, he stopped, his back to me, shoulders rising and falling with measured breaths. "There was an attempt," he said, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it. During the night. On your life. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? How? He turned then, and the expression on his face made me take an involuntary step back. Rage, cold, controlled but unmistakable, hardened his features into something barely human. His eyes had shifted fully to silver, a sign that the wolf within was dangerously close. Poison, he said, each syllable clipped, in the water basin in your chambers. If you had used it for your morning ablutions instead of the bath Clara prepared. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I understood the implication. Who? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We don't know yet. He crossed the space between us with predatory grace, stopping close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the wild pine and smoke scent of him intensified by exertion. But I will find out, and when I do, they will understand exactly what it means to threaten what is mine. What is mine? The possessive claim should have alarmed me, yet instead it sent a shiver of something entirely different down my spine. I'm not yours, I said quietly, needing to establish this boundary despite the circumstances. Not yet. For a moment, I thought I'd pushed too far. His eyes flashed dangerously, his jaw tightening. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. A short, harsh sound with little humor in it. No, he acknowledged, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face with unexpected gentleness. Not yet. But you're here, in my territory, under my protection, and no one touches what I protect. His fingers lingered at my temple, a point of warmth against my skin. You're not safe here, he continued, his voice dropping to that rumbling register that seemed to resonate within me. Not anymore. The council has decreed you must remain until the full moon, 3 days from now, when I must make my final choice. Until then, you don't leave my sight or Gabriel's. You think it was Serena, I said, the realization dawning. Or Lord Raven, his expression darkened. I think someone fears what your presence here means, and fear makes wolves dangerous. His hand dropped away from my face, leaving a ghost of sensation behind. Don't hide from me in the coming days, little wolf. Your life may depend on it. Those 3 days became the strangest of my life, days of shadow and revelation, of danger and unexpected intimacy. True to his word, the king kept me within his sight, incorporating me into the rhythm of his daily duties, in a way that raised eyebrows throughout the court. I sat beside him during morning audiences, witnessing firsthand how he balanced justice with mercy, strength with compassion. I attended council meetings, where my presence was initially met with skepticism, but gradually accepted as I offered occasional insights from a perspective no one else possessed. I even joined him in the war room, where maps spread across stone tables told stories of alliances and conflicts stretching back generations. Here, he said on the second day, his finger tracing a mountain pass on the southeastern border. This is where Shadow Valley lies in relation to the palace. His hand expanded outward, encompassing a vast territory. And this is what I protect: 500 miles of mountains, forests, and valleys. 37 packs, 9 human settlements under our protection, and countless wild wolves who answer to no alpha, but recognize our sovereignty. I studied the map, seeing my small world suddenly placed in context within his much larger one. It's overwhelming, I admitted. The responsibility. Yes. No false modesty, no platitudes, just simple acknowledgement of the weight he carried. That's why the council pushes so hard for a queen, for heirs. No single wolf should hold this much power without safeguards. Is that how you see a mate? As a safeguard? The question slipped out before I could reconsider its implications. He looked at me then, his eyes shifting to that storm cloud gray that I'd come to associate with his most honest moments. No, he said quietly. A true mate is a balance, someone who strengthens where you are weak, who challenges when you need challenging, who supports when you need support. His hand moved from the map to cover mine, warm and unexpectedly gentle. Someone who sees both the king and the wolf beneath and accepts both without flinching. His words stirred something in me. a longing I'd never acknowledged, a possibility I'd never permitted myself to consider. Before I could respond, Gabriel entered with news of suspicious movement along the western border, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between us. A barrier lowered, a truth acknowledged. That night, as we dined privately in his study, the conversation flowed more easily, punctuated by moments of comfortable silence that needed no filling. "Tell me of your dreams," he said, as we sat before the fire afterward, the flames casting his features in gold and shadow. Before all this, what did Elise of Shadow Valley want from life? No one had ever asked me that question. I looked into the dancing flames, searching for an answer I'd never fully articulated even to myself. "Connection," I said finally. "Not just to a mate or family, but to something larger, a purpose that used what I am, rather than seeing it as a limitation." I glanced up at him, finding his eyes intent on my face. Omegas are taught that our highest purpose is to bear strong children for worthy alphas. I always felt there should be more. "And what would that more look like?" he asked, no judgment in his tone, only genuine curiosity. I considered the question, ideas forming that I'd never dared voice aloud. Mediation, perhaps. Omegas can sense emotional currents that others miss. We could help resolve conflicts before they escalate to violence. Or healing, not just of bodies but of the divisions between packs, between wolves and humans. I shook my head slightly. Impossible dreams, probably. Why impossible? Because tradition says an Omega's place is protected within pack boundaries, not out in the world creating change. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, face serious in the firelight. Traditions evolve, Elise. Sometimes they need to. There was something in his voice, a conviction that made me wonder what changes he envisioned, what role he might see for someone like me in that future. But before I could ask, a knock interrupted us. Gabriel entered, his expression grave. "We found something," he said. "In Lord Raven's quarters." The king stood immediately. "Show me." Gabriel hesitated, glancing at me. "It involves Lady Elise directly. Perhaps she should—" "She comes with us," the king cut in, his tone brooking no argument. He extended his hand to me, an unexpected courtesy. "If you wish to." I took his hand, surprised at how natural the gesture felt. "I do." What Gabriel had found was a letter, intercepted from a messenger leaving the palace under cover of darkness, addressed to a name I didn't recognize at an outpost near the southern border. Written in a code that the king's intelligence officers had quickly deciphered, it detailed plans not just for my elimination, but for the disruption of the upcoming full moon ceremony. "The seal is Serena's," Gabriel pointed out, indicating the wax impression at the bottom of the parchment. "But the handwriting doesn't match samples we have of hers." "A clever feint," the king growled, his eyes flickering silver with anger. "Make it appear as if the daughter acts alone while the father maintains plausible innocence." He looked to Gabriel. "Where are they now?" "Still in their chambers. They believe the messenger got away clean." The king's decision was swift and absolute. "Detain them both. Quietly. I want no diplomatic incident before I have irrefutable proof of Raven's direct involvement." His hand found the small of my back, a protective gesture that sent warmth spreading through me despite the circumstances. "Double the guard on Lady Elise's chambers, and have Clara move her things to the royal wing immediately." I looked up at him in surprise. The royal wing was reserved for family and the most trusted advisors. Moving me there was a statement no one could misinterpret. "Is that wise?" I asked softly as Gabriel left to carry out the orders. "If they're truly plotting against me, won't this escalation provoke them further?" "Let them be provoked," he replied, his voice carrying that dangerous edge I'd come to recognize. "Let them understand exactly what happens to those who threaten what I—" He stopped, correcting himself with visible effort. "What is under my protection?" There it was again. That careful distinction between possession and protection. That space he deliberately maintained between claiming me and respecting my choice. It moved me in a way I hadn't expected. This restraint from the most dominant alpha in 5 territories. That night, I was installed in chambers connected to the king's own by a shared sitting room. Clara helped me settle in, her expression a mixture of concern and something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "The king has never brought anyone into the royal wing," she remarked, as she arranged my few belongings. "Not in all the years I've served here." It's just for safety, I said, though the excuse sounded hollow even to my own ears. Clara's knowing smile told me she wasn't fooled. Of course, my lady. She paused at the door before leaving. Whatever happens tomorrow at the ceremony, know that you've already changed things here, for the better. I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of silver wolves and poisoned chalices, of moon ceremonies and ancient vows. I woke before dawn to find the king seated in the shared sitting room, watching the first pale light touch the distant peaks through the crystal window. You're troubled, he said without turning, somehow sensing my presence. Today you must choose, I said, moving to stand beside him. The council requires it, yes. And if you choose me, what then? The question that had haunted me since my arrival finally found voice. What would it mean to be your queen? Now he did turn, rising from his seat with that fluid grace that always caught me by surprise. In the dawn light, his eyes were neither silver nor gray, but something in between. The color of truth, perhaps. It would mean partnership, he said simply. It would mean no more hiding, not your thoughts, not your dreams, not your strength. It would mean standing beside me as my equal in all things. He took a step closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the pine and smoke scent that had become oddly comforting. It would mean belonging, Elise, to me, to this place, to a purpose larger than either of us. My heart raced at his words, at the vision they conjured, so different from the cage I had feared, from the ornamental role I had dreaded. And if I'm not ready? I whispered, giving voice to my deepest fear. If I'm not strong enough for what you describe. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch gentle despite the power I knew resided in those fingers. You stood before the council without flinching. You faced Serena's threats with dignity. You've adapted to court politics in days where others struggle for years. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone. You are stronger than you know, little wolf. Something unfurled in my chest at his words. A warmth, a certainty, a recognition of truth I'd been denying. Before I could respond, a knock at the door announced Gabriel's arrival. It was time to prepare for the ceremony. The choosing ceremony was held in the ancient grove where hot springs bubbled from the mountain's heart, the sacred place the king had shown me days earlier. A circular clearing surrounded by ancient pines, their branches creating a natural cathedral above the steaming pools. Hundreds of candles floated on the water's surface, their flames steady despite the slight movement of the water. The court had gathered in a great circle around the largest pool, nobles and council members arranged according to rank and status. At the head of the circle stood Elder Matilda, her silver hair adorned with fresh pine needles woven with gold thread, symbolizing the ancient covenant between wolves and the mountain. I stood to one side with the other potential brides, 3 in total, including myself, and, surprisingly, Serena. Despite the evidence against her, the king had insisted on following tradition to the letter. She would be rejected publicly, not through scandal, a political calculation that impressed me with its foresight, even as it left me anxious about her presence. Nervous? Whispered the third potential, a pretty beta named Liliana from the Eastern Ridge. She seemed genuinely kind, with none of Serena's sharp edges. A little, I admitted. She squeezed my hand briefly. You've nothing to fear. Everyone knows his choice is made. Before I could ask what she meant, a horn sounded from the edge of the clearing. The king entered, dressed not in royal finery, but in the traditional garb of a pack alpha, leather and furs that emphasized the warrior beneath the crown. The firelight caught on the silver circlet at his brow, the only concession to his royal status. Elder Matilda raised her arms, and silence fell over the gathering. Under the full moon, as has been our way since the first pack found sanctuary in these mountains, we come to witness a choice. A king's choice of his mate, his queen, his other half. Her voice carried surprising power for one so aged. Let the choosing begin. The king moved to stand beside Matilda. His eyes found mine briefly across the clearing, and something passed between us. A promise. A question. One by one, he approached each potential bride. To Liliana, he bowed respectfully, taking her hand in his. You honor me with your willingness, he said, his voice pitched to carry to all present. But the bond is not there. You are released with gratitude and respect. Liliana curtsied gracefully, accepting his decision with dignity. There was no surprise in her expression, only quiet acceptance. Next came Serena, her beauty undeniable in a gown of deepest crimson that seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it. The king's expression hardened almost imperceptibly as he approached her. "Lady Serena," he said, his tone cooler than it had been with Liliana. "You have been presented 3 times as a potential queen. 3 times I have found no resonance between us." His gaze flicked briefly to Lord Raven, standing rigidly at the edge of the circle. "You are released for the final time. Seek happiness elsewhere." A flash of fury crossed her perfect features before she masked it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "As your majesty wishes," she said, her voice honeyed poison. Then he turned to me, and the world seemed to still. He crossed the space between us with measured steps, his eyes never leaving mine. When he reached me, he didn't immediately speak. Instead, he simply looked at me, really looked, as if seeing beyond surface and circumstance to something essential within. "Elise of Shadow Valley," he said finally. His voice changed, lower, resonant with something primal. "Found and chosen against all expectation." He extended his hand, palm up. An invitation, not a command. "I ask not for submission, but for partnership. Not for obedience, but for honesty. I ask you to stand not behind me, but beside me." His voice dropped further, becoming that soft growl that seemed meant for me alone. "Don't hide from me, little wolf. Not tonight. Not ever again." In that moment, I understood what Gabriel had sensed. The resonance between us that had nothing to do with status or politics, and everything to do with recognition of something kindred despite our differences. I placed my hand in his, feeling the strength in his fingers as they closed around mine. "I won't hide," I promised, my voice clear in the hushed clearing. "Not from you, not from myself, not from the future we might build." A smile broke across his face. Not the restrained, almost smile I'd glimpsed before, but something transformative, revealing the man beneath the crown, the wolf beneath the king. He drew me forward until our foreheads touched, an ancient gesture of connection older than any human ritual. "Then I choose you," he said simply. "As mate, as queen, as equal." Elder Matilda stepped forward, binding our joined hands with a cord woven of silver and gold. "What the mountain witnesses cannot be broken," she intoned. "What the pack acknowledges cannot be denied. Let all present recognize this bond and honor it through the generations to come." A chorus of howls rose from the gathered court, the traditional response to the completion of the choosing. Even those who had doubted me, I noticed, joined in the ancient affirmation. As tradition dictated, the king led me to the edge of the sacred pool. Together, we knelt, still bound hand to hand, and dipped our free hands into the warm, mineral-rich water. "From the mountain's heart to our own," he murmured, the ritual words carrying a weight of centuries. "Bound by water, bound by choice, bound by something greater than either." Later, much later, when the ceremony had concluded and we stood together on the balcony of what were now our shared chambers, he turned to me, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "There will be challenges," he said, his thumb tracing patterns on my palm, where the ceremonial cord had been. "Raven's plotting was only the beginning. Some will resist the changes your presence here will bring." "I know," I said, surprising myself with my lack of fear at the prospect. "But we'll face them together, he agreed, drawing me closer until I could feel his heartbeat against my own. "No more hiding, little wolf, for either of us." As his lips found mine in our first true kiss, gentle yet insistent, a promise and a claim, I thought of how far I'd come from that frightened Omega hiding in a cellar, waiting to be overlooked once again, from hidden to chosen, from fearful to fierce, from isolated to connected. I had found my place not in submission but in partnership, not in shadow, but in light. And as the mountain moon blessed us with its ancient witness, I knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them not by hiding, but by standing tall beside the king who had seen my true strength when even I had doubted its existence.